Now, one of the other things we're going to look at as we identify our routers and switches, we're going to go through the process of what a router or switch does as it brings up and is brought up and is given power. So when we bring the device up and plug it in, it's going to audit the hardware, find and locate Cisco IOS, and then load the configuration file. So we're going to watch that live on a device that doesn't have a configuration on it and see what it actually goes through to boot up and come to an operational state. As far as configuration is concerned, Cisco IOS devices can be connected to directly via a console port to do our configuration, or in the case of a router, you can have an auxiliary port. Now, the auxiliary port is usually plugged into a modem of some kind, and how many of you guys still even have modems on your devices anymore? But if you need to remotely access something via the phone line, the auxiliary port on a router can, and I've used it many times, can be a very useful tool to get into the device to manage it remotely. Typically, though, we want to have some sort of network source to access it. That would be either via Telnet, which I strongly do not recommend, or SSH. So the network sources we can configure the devices from would include Telnet, which I strongly do not recommend using because of its vulnerability to being watched, SSH, or Secure Shell. We also have the capability of getting in via a TFTP server and transferring information back and forth via TFTP. But there's other file transfer stuff you could use as well, such as SCP or FTP, or Secure FTP. TFTP is commonly looked at, but I kind of joke about that because let's set up our router and switch to do Secure Shell and securely connect to it, and then start transferring our configuration files via TFTP. Kind of doesn't make any sense. We're insecurely transferring our most important asset of our device via an insecure media such as insecure protocol like TFTP. So generally, if you get to the point where you're using SSH, you probably should be using an SCP server, a secure copy server. It's actually like FTP over SSH. You can use secure FTP, that would work also. But doing some sort of security as you're transporting your configuration around the network, probably a good idea as well. We get to the last one, which is the web or network management server as another way to access and manage our devices. Later on, we'll talk about the new web management capability for our routers, and we'll actually get to play around with how to set up and configure it via the web interface.